because it is a vertical garden, we need to think about what plants actually like to be on a tree, for instance. So there are a few that work really well. In Australia, we have Australian native orchids that are, this is about as big as this one gets. They come in all shapes and sizes, and this has beautiful little streams of pink orchids in the springtime, and it grows in bark basically because in its natural habitat it's clinging to the side of a tree, so it's perfect. All we'll need to do put in our pot is some bark for it to sit on. There are also succulents of all shapes and sizes. So I'll be choosing the succulents that grow for me. Some don't. They look at me and run away with horror. But there are some that grow really well. This is just a cutting. So I may or may not choose that one. Then along with the Australian native orchid, which is epiphytic, which means it lives in a tree and draws its moisture from the air, there's also these wonderful things that are commonly called air plants. And they have the most amazing flowers. These are tillandsias, and there's like millions of them. And this one's probably about, I think about 8 years old, maybe 6 years old, between 6 and 7, 8, thereabouts. So the dead ones have been removed, and there's a couple here with a few babies happening. So they just sort of hang around. I could just hang that on a wall and it would just keep growing. So all I need to do is make sure it's sort of sitting in the pot, occasionally get some more thrown at it, and keep my fingers crossed. The other great epiphytic plant that grow all over the place are bromeliads. You can get these lovely, lovely little ones. They don't all have to be big. You get small ones like this that just grow out on stalks, and they'll just keep growing. The back ones die off, so you don't need to worry about that. That's normal. And they just poke in the ground. And all you need to do to water this is to make sure this funnel in here is full of water. Except avoid too much water in wintertime because it will freeze if it's out in a freezy area. The other thing that you can use for just decoration and a bit of zhuzh or a bit of drapery is what we call grandfather's beard. Which is a type of moss, and it just also is epiphytic, and it does flower. You have to look pretty close at the flowers because they're tiny, but they just add a little bit of zhuzh down the side of your garden. The other one which I grow reasonably easily, is zygo cactus. Common names are things like Christmas cactus, Easter cactus, and you can see this is starting to flower. I'm assuming in the Northern Hemisphere it's probably a Christmas cactus. And it doesn't have huge amounts of roots and does a nice bit of a drape down the vertical garden as well. So the next thing is to plant it up. Decide the plants, how much you want to start with, and which ones you want to use. And you probably think about repotting these, maybe depending on how vigorous the growth is, maybe in 2 years, 3 years. Perhaps, depending also on the plant. You would never have to repot your tillandsia. This is the air plant, because it'll just grow in the air. So it just needs something to hold it in place so it doesn't get blown away really. And it's, for me, it's the perfect colour to go with this particular vertical garden. The colours just work. When you choose your cup or jug or whatever it is that you're going to use on your vertical garden, think about the plant. It does need somewhere for its roots to grow, and it does need space. So this is probably all right to disguise a tillandsia in, but wouldn't be much good for the cactuses or other things that have roots. Hole in the bottom. I asked hubby to make sure they had good drainage hole because I'm going to be using epiphytic things, and we don't want anything to fill up with water to cause root rot. Really important. You don't want your plants to die because they're basically suffocating to death. So you can see this is the same size as that. If you don't have a hole drilled in the bottom, you would adapt your watering to suit that, and I'll talk about that as well. The other thing you can do is once you've got the backing on it, it's actually a vase. You could cut flowers in it if you wanted to. Just put a little plastic bag and filled it up with water, so I could put my cuttings in there if I wanted to, trim off the excess and just line the bottom and put my cuttings in there. That's another thing you could do with it. Grow something here and have a nursery beside it. Just some ideas for you to play with. So now I'm going to plant it up and talk about how I'm going to do that. Right, so one of the things is that we know we've got a nice big fat drainage hole here and here. You don't want water pouring through and dripping dirt everywhere, and eventually your bowl will run out of dirt. So you want to put something over the top of the hole. I'm just going to use a couple of these makeup remover pads and just sit them in the bottom to cover up the hole so no dirt will drip out. So if you're finding you're getting dirt stains and such down here, hold back on the water. I'll show you what to do with that. But also put something over the hole so it doesn't run away. Good way to do that. Then fill it up with dirt and do your planting. Go gently when you tap it in to place, and I'll come back to you when I've planted it all up and you can see what I've done. It's best to get specialty potting mix if you can, because dirt out of the garden isn't going to necessarily be great. So for epiphytic plants, they need lots and lots of drainage. So you can use bark for things like the orchids or things that grow in trees, or specialty succulent mix, which has got a lot of bark and sometimes they even put bits of concrete and various scraps into the soil, but it's perfect for succulents because they like to be watered, but they don't like to have their feet wet, so it drains straight through. But we're going to do it in a different way in terms of watering, so we can control completely what's going on. So there we have it, all planted up. I think it looks pretty terrific, and once it settles in, it will look lovely. The zygo cactus is white, so it will look pretty. So what I've got here now is the small bromeliad up here is going to send pups out to the side here, so it doesn't need root area. I've got the tillandsia or air plant in a bunch, just stuffed in the top there, and hopefully that'll settle in nicely. A bit of zygo cactus here, and we have the other bit of zygo cactus here. I put a stone in there to prop it up a bit because it was really sort of hanging down. It just did not want to play with me nicely this morning. Another little bit of bromeliad and some grandfather's beard. I haven't watered it yet. So how do we water these things without getting a mess and having it drip everywhere? And this is what works for me. I use a squirty bottle. So for the bromeliads, it's very easy. You put the nozzle down the end of the plant and probably about 3 or 4 squirts and it's done. You would do that depending on how hot it is, because obviously in summertime it's going to evaporate really quickly. You may want to check it daily because this veranda can get, in Canberra we get over 40 degrees, so it's going to evaporate in a day. So I can do that quite well and it'll be happy. For the other plants, I just go near the roots and use the squirty bottle to water. So I'm never ever going to overwater, drown them, have stuff dripping everywhere. And because they are succulents, once a week in summertime is enough. Once a month in winter is probably enough. And this is what works for me. You need to work it out what's going to be good for your conditions. And of course the other thing, and I forgot to mention, make sure it's well rinsed on the inside. You don't want your sealer, your grout additives, or whatever it is mixing in with the water and poisoning your plants. So if you're having long-term issues with things just not growing, it might be because of the chemicals. So give it a good scrub out and a rinse. Hopefully it's all nice and waterproof, and have another go in case it's actually the water poisoning your plants. So that's another tip. I hope you've really enjoyed this vertical garden journey and that you're keen to make your own now and know that you can successfully grow plants, and there are plants that will grow there. And in a year's time, this will probably look very similar, and hopefully all will be established. I'll repost on its birthday.